The morning light filtered through Daniel Chen's apartment in soft amber streaks, catching dust motes that drifted lazily through air thick with the smell of turpentine and coffee. He stood before an easel, brush suspended mid-stroke, staring at the canvas where crimson bled into violet in ways that reminded him of his mother's hands when she'd taught him to see color as emotion rather than pigment. The apartment was small, a single room with exposed brick and a Murphy bed that never quite folded flat, but 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows and the light was perfect. That was all that mattered. His neural interface buzzed against his temple, the 6th call from Richard this week. Daniel ignored it, dragging his brush through cadmium yellow and watching it transform the painting's dark corner into something that resembled hope, or at least the memory of it. Outside, the city hummed with the white noise of maglev trains and delivery drones, the soundtrack of 2045 playing on endless repeat. His coffee sat in a chipped ceramic mug his mother had made 20 years ago, back when she'd still believed the Chen family could value something beyond their social credit scores and stock portfolios. The handle was cracked, repaired with gold leaf in the Japanese kintsugi tradition, making the damage part of its beauty. Miranda would call it garbage. His father would call it sentiment. Daniel called it truth. The neural interface buzzed again. This time, a text materialized in his peripheral vision, Richard's words floating translucent against the morning light. Dad's 75th tonight. Miranda insists you come. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Daniel sipped his coffee and watched the message dissolve. Of course Miranda insisted. She'd been engineering his public humiliation for months now, dropping comments at family dinners about his lifestyle choices, his modest teacher's salary, the ancient Honda Civic he refused to upgrade despite the fact that most people his age were leasing self-driving Tesla neurons. She measured worth in data points, follower counts, credit scores, property values, investment portfolios. By those metrics, Daniel Chen was a failure, and Miranda wanted everyone to remember it. He set down his brush and pulled on a cardigan from the vintage shop on 5th Street, soft wool that had belonged to someone else first, someone whose history he'd never know. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who looked younger than 35, dark hair perpetually paint-stained at the temples, eyes that still held curiosity instead of calculation. His father would be disappointed by the cardigan. He was always disappointed. The walk to Jefferson High took 20 minutes through neighborhoods the city planners had labeled transitional, which meant artists and immigrants and people who still believed in cash transactions and face-to-face conversations. Daniel preferred it to the sterile smart districts uptown where every surface was interactive and every interaction was monetized. Here, Mrs. Kowalski still hung laundry on her fire escape. Here, bodega cats sat in windows judging passers-by. Here, people knew his name without consulting their neural feeds. The school's facade was pre-war brick, maintained but not modernized, a deliberate choice by a district that valued character over aesthetics. Inside, the hallways smelled like floor wax and teenage anxiety and the particular desperation of underfunded education. Daniel's classroom was on the 3rd floor, windows facing east, walls covered in student work that ranged from technically proficient to emotionally devastating. He was arranging supplies for the day's lesson when Sophie Martinez appeared in his doorway, 2 cups of coffee balanced in one hand, her neural interface glowing soft blue at her temple indicating she'd been up since 5 grading papers. She wore a simple dress that probably cost less than Miranda spent on manicures, dark hair pulled back, eyes that missed absolutely nothing. You're ignoring your brother again, Sophie said, handing him the coffee. She'd memorized how he took it 2 years ago after he'd mentioned it once in passing. 2 sugars, oat milk, cinnamon if they had it. They always had it when Sophie brought coffee. How did you know? Your left eye twitches when you're stressed about family obligations. It's been twitching since you walked in. She leaned against his desk, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle that made him think of laboratory experiments and late-night conversations. Big event tonight, my father's 75th birthday. Black tie. 200 guests. A social credit score requirement to get through the door. Sounds awful. It will be. Daniel sipped the coffee. Perfect, as always. Miranda's been sharpening her knives for weeks. I'm pretty sure tonight's the night she tries to get me removed from the family trust. Sophie's eyebrows rose. Can she do that, if she convinces my father I'm a financial liability, which won't be hard? I'm a 35-year-old art teacher living in a 400-square-foot apartment. By Chin family standards, I'm basically homeless. You're also the best teacher in this school and possibly the kindest person I've ever met, but I'm guessing those metrics don't factor into trust fund calculations. Not so much, no. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed over 3 years of adjacent classrooms and shared lunch periods and conversations that started about curriculum and ended about philosophy. Daniel had asked her to dinner once. 2 years ago, voice shaking with hope and terror. She'd said no, gently but firmly, something about not wanting to complicate their professional relationship. He'd understood. He'd been disappointed. They'd stayed friends, and sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decode. You should take someone, Sophie said suddenly. To the party. An ally, you volunteering? She met his eyes, and something flickered there, quick as lightning. Maybe. If you're asking, I'm asking, then I'm saying yes. She pushed off the desk, her shoulder brushing his, deliberate or accidental he couldn't tell. What time should I pretend to be someone who belongs at a Chin family event? 7. And Sophie, you belong anywhere you choose to be. That's not pretending, she smiled, the kind that reached her eyes and made his chest tight. Pick me up at 6:30. And Daniel, wear something that will make Miranda furious. I was planning on the cardigan. Perfect. The day passed in a blur of still lives and perspective lessons and a conversation with Jamie Morrison's mother, who stopped him in the hallway to say thank you for staying late, for seeing potential in a kid everyone else had written off, for changing her son's life. Daniel deflected the praise but stored the moment somewhere deep, a reminder that wealth came in forms Miranda's algorithms couldn't measure. By 5:30 he was home, showering off paint and stress, pulling on the only suit he owned, purchased secondhand from a consignment shop that specialized in designer labels for people who couldn't afford designer prices. It fit well enough. Miranda would notice it wasn't new. Everyone would notice it wasn't new. That was fine. He wasn't trying to impress them. Sophie lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn that had been converted into apartments, 4th floor walk-up, window boxes full of herbs. She answered the door in a dress that was simple and perfect and made his mouth go dry, her hair loose around her shoulders, neural interface powered down so the soft skin at her temple was unmarked. You look terrified, she said. I'm taking the most interesting woman I know to face my family's judgment. I'm allowed to be terrified, most interesting woman you know. That's quite a compliment coming from someone who once spent 40 minutes explaining the symbolism in a single Rothko painting. I stand by that analysis, I know you do. It's one of your more endearing qualities. She grabbed a small clutch and stepped into the hallway, locking the door behind her. Ready? Absolutely not. Let's go. The Honda backfired twice on the drive to his father's estate, a mansion in Westchester that was more monument than home. Sophie laughed at the second backfire, the kind of genuine amusement that made Daniel forget to be embarrassed about the ancient car. The rust spots on the passenger door, the analog controls that required actual physical input instead of neural commands. I love this car, Sophie said, running her hand along the dashboard. It's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Unlike its owner, you've never pretended to be anything, Daniel. That's your problem and your power. The estate gates opened automatically, facial recognition scanning them both and probably updating their social profiles with attendance data that would be analyzed by marketing algorithms before they even reached the house. The circular driveway was already packed with vehicles that cost more than most people earned in 5 years, neural-synced Teslas, hydrogen BMWs, a few vintage combustion cars owned by people wealthy enough to afford the carbon taxes. The valets, impeccably dressed in smart fabric uniforms that regulated their body temperature and monitored their biometrics, exchanged barely concealed smirks when Daniel's Honda coughed into the queue. "They're judging your car," Sophie observed. "They're judging everything. It's their job." Daniel emerged first, then moved to open Sophie's door before she could do it herself. She stepped out with the kind of natural grace that didn't require coaching or enhancement, taking in the mansion with an expression of amused curiosity rather than intimidation. The building was marble and glass and architectural ego, complete with ice sculptures on the lawn, holographic displays floating above the gardens, and what appeared to be an actual string quartet playing on the terrace. "So this is the modest family dinner you mentioned," Sophie said. "I may have undersold it, Daniel. There are ice sculptures. Plural. Of your father's face." He followed her gaze to where, indeed, 3 frozen replicas of Victor Chen's stern visage stared out from the rose garden, each illuminated by color-shifting LED arrays that made them look alternately noble and demonic. "Yeah, that's Miranda's touch. Thanks for coming. I needed an ally, or a witness." She squeezed his hand, quick pressure that sent electricity up his arm and straight to his chest. Inside, the house was exactly as he remembered, cold despite the climate control, filled with art purchased for investment value rather than beauty, every surface smart and interactive and utterly soulless. A wall-sized display in the foyer showed real-time updates of family members' social credit scores, stock portfolios, and professional achievements. Richard's numbers dominated the top of the screen, his CFO position at Chen Properties highlighted in gold. Daniel's name was near the bottom, his teacher's salary displayed with mathematical precision that felt like deliberate mockery. The great hall had been transformed for the occasion, crystal chandeliers augmented with holographic projections, tables set with china that probably cost more than Daniel earned in 6 months. 200 guests mingled, their neural interfaces creating a visible network of light and data, everyone simultaneously present and distracted by feeds only they could see. Business associates, family friends, social climbers, and the kind of wealthy that considered wealth a moral virtue rather than an accident of birth. Daniel scanned the crowd and found Lucas immediately. His 15-year-old nephew standing awkwardly near the dessert table, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. The kid lit up when he saw Daniel, started to move toward him, but Miranda materialized from the crowd like a beautiful shark sensing blood in the water. She wore Versace, of course, the dress probably cost more than Daniel's yearly salary, her neural interface glowing with the soft amber that indicated she was actively managing her social media presence, recording and curating every moment for her million followers. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, sharp enough to cut. "Lucas, sweetheart," she said, placing a manicured hand on the boy's shoulder. "Uncle Daniel is busy. Why don't you talk to the Zhang's son? He just got into Princeton. Early admission. Full scholarship. Very impressive." Lucas deflated visibly. Daniel caught his eye and winked, a promise of later, of real conversation. The kid managed a small smile and wandered off toward a cluster of teenagers who were all absorbed in their neural feeds, physically present but mentally elsewhere. "Miranda," Daniel said. "You look expensive, thank you, darling." "I try." She turned her attention to Sophie, and Daniel could practically see her running facial recognition, pulling up Sophie's public profile, assessing and dismissing her in the seconds it took most people to blink. "And who is this, Sophie Martinez?" Sophie said, extending her hand with complete confidence. "I teach chemistry at Daniel's school," another teacher. Miranda's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. How wonderful. We need more educators willing to work for passion instead of profit. So noble, someone has to teach the next generation that value and price aren't synonyms, Sophie replied, voice pleasant, words precise. Though I understand the distinction can be confusing for some people, Daniel coughed to cover a laugh. Miranda's smile went rigid. Well, do enjoy the party. Dinner will be served at 8. You're seated at table 12. She gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. Near the kitchen doors, the seating equivalent of a slap. I'm sure you'll find the conversation stimulating. She glided away, already updating her social feeds, probably crafting some cutting observation about Daniel's date for her followers to dissect and amplify. She's terrified, Sophie observed quietly. Miranda? She just told us we're sitting at the kids' table. Look at her hands. White-knuckling that clutch. Her neural interface is cycling through 3 different apps simultaneously. Someone who's actually secure doesn't need to prove it this hard. Daniel studied Miranda across the room, seeing what Sophie saw, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she kept checking her follower count. The desperate edge beneath the polished surface. You see a lot, chemistry teacher. I'm trained to observe reactions. She turned to face him fully, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her eyes. And catalysts. Before he could respond, his father appeared, moving through the crowd with the gravitational pull of someone who'd spent 50 years believing he was the center of every room. Victor Chen at 75 was still imposing, tall and straight-backed, his hair silver but thick, his suit custom-tailored, his neural interface top-of-the-line military grade that probably cost more than most people's cars. He saw Daniel and something complicated crossed his face. Disappointment and obligation and the faint hope that this time, somehow, his son would be different. Daniel. You came, happy birthday, Dad. Victor looked him over with the assessing eye of someone who'd built an empire by evaluating assets. His gaze lingered on the second-hand suit, the absence of luxury accessories, the way Daniel stood without apology for any of it. That suit is the same one from my 70th birthday, it still fits. That's not the virtue you think it is, son. He turned his attention to Sophie, and Daniel saw the exact moment his father calculated her social credit score, her profession, her lack of impressive credentials. And who's this? Sophie extended her hand, meeting Victor's eyes without deference or fear. Sophie Martinez. I teach chemistry at Daniel's school. Happy birthday, Mr. Chen. Daniel speaks very highly of you, does he? Victor's tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. Another teacher. I see. He walked away without another word, drawn back into conversation with a cluster of business associates who were probably discussing market projections and investment strategies and all the things Victor understood. Sophie's smile didn't falter, but Daniel saw the flash in her eyes, not hurt but noted, filed away for future reference. I'm sorry, Daniel said. He's a man who measures worth in dollars. I grew up around diplomats. Daniel. Embassy parties, state dinners, rooms full of people who thought their positions made them important. I know the type. They forget that respect is earned, not purchased. The revelation that Sophie had grown up in diplomatic circles, that she'd chosen teaching despite presumably having other options, made Daniel see her differently, or maybe just more clearly. He wanted to ask about it, wanted to know everything, but dinner was being called and guests were moving toward their assigned tables, and Sophie was already heading toward table 12 with the kind of grace that made expensive people look clumsy. They sat near the kitchen doors where the noise and heat from food service made conversation difficult, and the view was blocked by centerpieces that cost more than monthly rent. Around them, Cousin Amy, who'd always been kind, a few distant relatives Daniel barely knew, and 2 of Richard's junior colleagues who spent the entire first course absorbed in their neural feeds, occasionally laughing at private jokes invisible to everyone else. The salad course arrived with unnecessary fanfare, microgreens arranged like architectural models, edible flowers that probably cost more per gram than Daniel's monthly utilities. Miranda held court from table 1, her voice carrying across the room as she detailed her recent charity gala, the one where she'd worn vintage McQueen and raised awareness, though Daniel noticed she never mentioned actual funds raised or causes supported. Her neural interface glowed steadily, recording everything, curating her life into content her followers would consume and forget within hours. Sophie leaned close enough that her shoulder pressed against his, warm through the fabric of her dress. She's mentioned her follower count 3 times in the last 5 minutes. That's pathological, she's always been like this, Daniel said quietly, pushing microgreens around his plate. Even before the neural interfaces made it quantifiable. She needs constant validation that she matters, and you don't. I matter to my students. To Mrs. Kowalski when I help her carry groceries. To the bodega cat who demands tribute every morning. He met Sophie's eyes, found something there that made his chest tight. To you, maybe. That's enough, more than enough, Sophie said, and her hand found his under the table, fingers threading through his in a way that felt both new and inevitable. The touch sent electricity up his arm, made him hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, shoulder and hip and the space where their hands met in secret. The main course was being served when Miranda stood, tapping her wine glass with a fork, the crystal ring cutting through conversation like a blade. The room quieted, 200 people turning their attention to the woman in Versace who'd spent a decade cultivating the kind of presence that demanded notice. I hope everyone's enjoying this beautiful celebration, Miranda began, smile perfect, voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd studied charisma like a language. Victor, we're so honored to celebrate 75 years of your wisdom and leadership. Polite applause. Victor raised his glass from the head table, looking pleased and slightly confused about where this was going. Family is everything to the Chens, Miranda continued, and Daniel felt his stomach drop because he knew that tone, knew the knife was coming. Legacy. Excellence. The standards that made us who we are. And as we look toward the future, toward the next generation who'll carry the Chen name forward, I think it's important we talk about protecting what we've built. Sophie's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. Across the table, Cousin Amy looked uncomfortable, already understanding what was coming. Richard and I have been having conversations with Victor about the family trust, Miranda said, and now she was looking directly at Daniel, smile sharp as broken glass. About ensuring the resources our family has worked so hard to accumulate go to those who will honor that legacy. Who understand that success requires sacrifice and ambition and standards. Jesus Christ, Sophie breathed. She's actually doing this publicly. Of course she is, Daniel said, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Maximum humiliation requires maximum audience. Miranda was warming to her theme now, gesturing expansively, her neural interface recording everything for the inevitable social media post. We worry, as any family would, when we see members making choices that don't reflect our values. When someone is 35 years old, renting instead of owning, driving a car that's older than most of the wine we're drinking tonight, working a job that pays. What, $55,000 a year? 52, Daniel said clearly, and the correction carried in the sudden silence. Budget cuts. Miranda's smile didn't waver but her eyes went cold. Exactly my point, Daniel. Sweetie, we love you, but you're a liability. What happens when you have a crisis? When you need money? The family would have to step in, and frankly, we've all worked too hard to subsidize poor decisions. Richard was staring at his plate, jaw clenched, saying nothing. Victor looked troubled but thoughtful, and Daniel realized with sick certainty that Miranda had already been working on his father, already planting seeds of doubt, already building the case. Richard and I have petitioned Victor to restructure the family trust. Miranda announced, pulling a leather folder from beneath her chair like a magician revealing the finale. Specifically, to remove beneficiaries who demonstrate financial irresponsibility and poor judgment. It's not personal. It's protective. The room erupted in murmurs, neural interfaces lighting up as people recorded and shared and commented in real time, turning his humiliation into content, into data points, into entertainment. Daniel felt Sophie's hand tighten on his, felt her lean closer like she was preparing to fight his battles for him, but he needed to see this play out, needed to understand exactly how far Miranda would go. The Wongs were asking about you just last week, Miranda said, false sympathy dripping from every word. They saw you in that Honda and wondered if you were okay, if you needed help. What was I supposed to tell them, Daniel? That you're choosing to live like this? That you have no ambition, no drive, no pride? Cousin Amy spoke up, voice sharp. Miranda, this is cruel, it's pragmatic, Miranda countered. Daniel's lifestyle choices, his complete lack of savings or investments or property, they're embarrassing. They reflect poorly on all of us. The Chin name means something, and we can't have someone dragging it down because they'd rather play with crayons than build something real. The words landed like physical blows, each one calculated for maximum damage. Daniel watched his father's face, saw the disappointment settle there like sediment, saw the moment Victor started to believe Miranda's narrative. Around the room, business associates were nodding, agreeing that yes, standards mattered, yes, the trust should be protected, yes, success was measurable and Daniel had failed to measure up. Miranda produced documents from her folder, sliding them across the table toward Victor with theatrical precision. These are bank records showing Daniel borrowed $2 million from Richard 3 years ago. He's never repaid a cent. This is exactly the kind of financial irresponsibility I'm talking about, the room gasped. Daniel stared at the papers. Recognized them as sophisticated forgeries, dates and amounts and signatures that looked real enough to convince anyone who didn't know better. She'd been planning this for months, building her case, manufacturing evidence. The audacity was almost impressive. Richard had gone pale, staring at the documents like they were weapons pointed at his head. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Miranda, I don't think, Richard is too kind to say it, but I'm not, Miranda interrupted, voice rising with righteous anger. Daniel, you're a leech. You take from this family and give nothing back. You're not even grateful. You show up in your thrift store clothes and your ancient car and expect us to treat you like an equal when you've done nothing to earn it. Sophie was watching him intently, and Daniel could feel her waiting, could feel her wanting him to defend himself, to fight back, to expose the lies. But he needed Miranda to finish, needed her to reveal exactly who she was to everyone watching. He needed the audience to see it clearly. Are you going to correct her? Sophie whispered, voice urgent against his ear. Not yet, Daniel said quietly, still calm, still watching Miranda perform. Why not? Because I want to see how far she'll go. Victor was studying the forged documents, face heavy with something that looked like grief. He looked up at Daniel, eyes searching for something, some explanation, some defense. Daniel. Is this true? Did you borrow money from your brother? The entire room waited. This was the moment Daniel could defend himself, could call out the forgery, could fight back with facts and evidence. 200 people holding their breath, neural interfaces recording, waiting to see if the family disappointment would finally break. Instead, Daniel met his father's eyes and asked, "What do you think, Dad?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victor's face crumpled slightly, and Daniel saw him interpret the non-answer as admission, saw him believe Miranda's carefully constructed lie because it fit the narrative he'd always believed about his younger son. The disappointment. The failure. The one who chose art over empire, I think, Victor said heavily, each word weighted with regret. I think Miranda might be right. About the trust, The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Cousin Amy gasped. Lucas looked devastated, like he was watching his hero fall. Richard still wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes, guilt written across every line of his body. Miranda's smile was triumphant, victory complete. I'm glad you agree, Victor, she said smoothly, pulling out a tablet and stylus. The paperwork is ready. Just need your signature after dinner, and we can finalize the restructuring. Protect the family legacy the way it deserves to be protected. She'd won. Or thought she had. Daniel felt the weight of Sophie's gaze, felt her hand steady in his, felt the moment stretch and expand. Around them, servers were clearing plates, the clink of crystal and silver providing soundtrack to his public humiliation. People were avoiding his eyes now, embarrassed for him, pitying him, already writing him off. Then Sophie stood, she didn't let go of his hand. She stood with her wine glass raised, tapping it gently with her knife, and the room quieted again because the energy had shifted, because Sophie Martinez radiated the kind of confidence that came from actually knowing yourself rather than constantly performing for others. I'd like to say something. If I may, Sophie said, voice carrying clear and strong. Miranda looked annoyed, like an actress interrupted mid-scene. Of course, dear. Though I'm not sure what. I've known Daniel for 3 years, Sophie interrupted, and there was steel beneath the pleasant tone. And I have to tell you all, he's absolutely terrible with money. Daniel's head snapped up, betrayal flashing across his face before he could control it. The table laughed, Miranda most of all, and he felt something crack in his chest because Sophie of all people, Sophie who he thought understood, just last week, Sophie continued, playing to the crowd now. He spilled coffee all over himself because he was so distracted. Ruined a perfectly good shirt. Had to borrow one from the lost and found at school. The crowd was eating it up, nodding along, confirming their beliefs about the scattered artist who couldn't manage basic adult tasks. He's disorganized, loses his keys constantly, don't even get me started on his filing system. Finally, Miranda said, someone who sees clearly, but you know what else happened that morning? Sophie paused, let the question settle. The morning he spilled coffee all over himself and borrowed a lost and found shirt, the room waited. Daniel stared at Sophie, understanding dawning slowly, seeing the trap she was setting with the precision of a chemist balancing an equation. Our school received an anonymous donation, Sophie said softly. $500,000. To the arts program. Anonymously. From an LLC we'd never heard of. What a coincidence, right? The same morning Daniel's a mess, $500,000 appears, the mood shifted, subtle as a tide change. People leaned forward. Neural interfaces stopped recording social feeds and started recording this moment, sensing something larger happening. And that's not the only coincidence, Sophie continued, voice steady, every word precise. 2 years ago, Daniel mentioned a student whose family lost their home. That same week, that family received an anonymous payment covering 6 months' rent. Last year, Daniel casually mentioned a coworker with cancer who couldn't afford treatment. Next day, her GoFundMe was mysteriously fully funded. Daniel felt his chest expand, felt something warm and overwhelming flood through him as he understood what Sophie was doing, how she was defending him without asking permission, how she was showing his family who he really was because he'd been too stubborn or too hurt to do it himself. What are you suggesting? Miranda demanded, voice sharp now, sensing danger. Sophie sat back down, close enough that her thigh pressed against Daniel's, and smiled with perfect innocence. Nothing. Just that maybe financial responsibility looks different than we think. Maybe some people are so bad with money because they're too busy giving it away. The table fell utterly silent. Victor stared at Daniel with new confusion, calculations running behind his eyes. Richard had gone white as paper, something clicking into place. And then, as if choreographed by a deity with a sense of dramatic timing, phones started buzzing, Richard's phone first, the neural interface flashing urgent red. Then Miranda's. Then multiple devices around the table lighting up simultaneously, emergency notifications overriding social media feeds and entertainment apps. Daniel watched Richard's face drain of all remaining color, watched his brother's hands start to tremble as he read whatever message had just arrived. Richard? Miranda's voice had lost its polish, raw fear bleeding through. What is it? Richard's voice barely worked, each word dragged up from somewhere deep. It's from Artemis Holdings. The name meant nothing to most guests, but Victor's head snapped up like he'd been shocked. Around the room, business associates were murmuring, recognition spreading through the crowd. Artemis? Victor said. Our silent investor. Richard was reading from his phone, voice breaking with each word. They're calling in the loan. Immediate repayment of $12 million or they'll initiate foreclosure proceedings on Chen properties. Dad, they've given us 48 hours, the room erupted. Business partners stood, demanding explanations. The chamber quartet stopped playing. Miranda grabbed Richard's phone, reading frantically, her perfectly curated facade cracking in real time as her neural interface recorded every moment of her panic for the million followers who measured her worth in engagement metrics. This can't be right, Miranda said, voice rising toward hysteria. We've never missed a payment. Richard, tell them we've never missed a payment, because I've been using personal funds to cover them, Richard said, the confession spilling out in front of everyone, every business associate and family friend and social climber who'd come to celebrate success and instead found themselves witnessing collapse. I'm tapped out, Miranda. The company's been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Artemis Holdings is the only reason we haven't gone bankrupt. Victor stood so abruptly his chair fell backward, the crash loud in the sudden silence. What? Richard, you told me we were expanding. You showed me projections, growth charts, we were bleeding out, Richard said, and Daniel saw his brother's carefully constructed world crumbling in real time, saw the weight of 3 years of lies finally crushing him. The West Side development failed. The downtown properties haven't rented in 18 months. The new construction ran 300% over budget because I hired cheap contractors who couldn't deliver. Dad, I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to admit I'd failed. $12 million? Miranda's voice had gone shrill, her perfectly modulated media voice abandoned in favor of raw panic. Where are we supposed to get $12 million in 48 hours? Business partners were excusing themselves, sensing a sinking ship, their neural interfaces already updating their networks with the breaking news that Chen Properties was in crisis. The social credit scores visible on the wall display started dropping in real time as algorithms registered the scandal, as reputation became quantifiable loss. The chamber quartet packed their instruments. Servers stopped serving. The party was over. Amidst the chaos, Sophie was studying Richard's phone over Miranda's shoulder, reading the email with the focus she brought to complex chemical equations. Then she looked at the embossed napkins on the table, at the centerpiece flowers, at the menu card still sitting beside abandoned plates. Her eyes tracked across details most people wouldn't notice, making connections, following threads. Artemis, Sophie said casually, voice cutting through the noise with conversational ease. That's an interesting name for an investment firm, Miranda rounded on her, desperation making her vicious. What, Artemis? Greek goddess of the hunt. Wild places. Protector of the vulnerable. Sophie paused, let the information settle. And art, in some traditions. Patron of artists, specifically, Daniel felt his entire body tense, felt his carefully maintained calm start to crack. Sophie wasn't looking at him, but he could feel her awareness, could feel her setting the final trap with the precision of a master strategist who'd been 3 moves ahead this entire time. It's funny, Sophie continued, voice still light, still conversational, what you choose to name things. Names carry meaning. My father always said you can tell someone's values by what they name their treasures. Now she turned, met Daniel's eyes directly. Daniel, didn't your mother have an art studio? Before she passed? The question seemed innocent. But Daniel's face betrayed everything to those watching closely enough, and Sophie was ensuring everyone watched closely. Richard's fork dropped with a clatter that rang like a bell in the sudden silence. What was it called? Sophie asked. I feel like you mentioned it once. Daniel held her gaze for a long moment, saw the challenge there, the invitation to finally stop hiding, to finally show his family exactly who he was. His voice came out quiet but clear, carrying in the breathless silence. The Artemis Studio. The name hung in the air like a detonation waiting to happen. Sophie nodded slowly, as if just remembering something she'd known all along. But her eyes were sharp as surgical steel, watching realization dawn across faces around the room. Richard was barely breathing, staring at Daniel like he was seeing a stranger. No, what? Miranda looked between them, brain struggling to connect dots her algorithms hadn't predicted. What does his mother's art studio have to do with? She stopped, understanding finally catching up, horror spreading across her face. Cousin Amy had figured it out, hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, but Victor looked confused and angry, surrounded by the wreckage of his birthday celebration, his company's collapse, his family's secrets spilling out like blood. What? Someone explain what's happening. Richard stood abruptly, his chair falling backward to match his father's, mirror images of Chin Men losing control. He stared across the table at Daniel, and his voice when he spoke was stripped of everything but raw truth. It's you, Richard said. Artemis Holdings. It's been you this whole time. The table erupted in confused murmurs, neural interfaces lighting up as people tried to process what Richard had just said, tried to reconcile Daniel the struggling art teacher with Daniel the mysterious benefactor who'd been keeping Chin Properties afloat for 3 years. Miranda was staring at her husband like he'd spoken in a language she didn't understand, her perfect facade cracking in real time as her million followers watched through her neural feed. Daniel said nothing, face unreadable, and the silence stretched until it became unbearable. That's insane, Miranda finally said, voice shrill. Daniel doesn't have $12 million. He drives a Honda. He rents. He's a teacher, Richard laughed, bitter and hysterical, the sound of a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. He doesn't have 12 million. He has more. Way more. He turned to Daniel, and his voice cracked. How long have you known? That I've been secretly taking your money to save Dad's company, since the first payment, Daniel said quietly, his first admission cutting through the chaos like a blade. You're not as careful with email security as you think. Richard, where would he get millions of dollars? Miranda demanded, but her voice had lost its conviction, her algorithms failing to process data that didn't fit her carefully constructed worldview. He's a teacher. He makes $52,000 a year. He lives in 400 square feet. The math doesn't work. Daniel felt Sophie's hand tighten on his, felt her steady presence beside him like an anchor. He'd played this moment in his head 1,000 times over the past 3 years, imagined the confrontation, the revelation, the satisfaction of watching his family realize they'd been wrong about everything. But now that it was happening, he felt only exhaustion and a strange kind of grief for the family they could have been if anyone had bothered to actually see him. Remember when I took that sabbatical 7 years ago? Daniel said, voice cutting through the murmurs. The room quieted, everyone leaning forward. You all thought I had a breakdown after Mom died. Dad told everyone I was finding myself in Europe. Like it was something shameful, Victor shifted uncomfortably, jaw clenched. You were gone for 2 years, I was painting, Daniel said simply. Mom left me her studio, her supplies, her technique journals. Everything she'd been working on for 30 years. I spent 2 years finishing a series she'd started, 17 paintings, mixed media, abstract expressionism. A mother-son collaboration spanning decades. His voice caught slightly, the only crack in his composure. I called it conversations I can no longer have. The room was utterly silent now, even Miranda frozen as the story unfolded. As Daniel's secret life revealed itself layer by layer, I sold 16 of the paintings. Daniel continued. Kept one for myself. A private collector, a woman who'd watched her own son die and saw something in the work that spoke to her grief, she bought the entire series. He paused, let the moment stretch. $47 million, the number landed like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the remaining guests. Miranda's face went white, then red, then white again. Even Sophie looked stunned despite having orchestrated this reveal, despite having known something big was coming. 47, Miranda breathed, and it sounded like a prayer or a curse. After taxes, agent fees, estate costs, I netted about $31 million, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of every word. I put most of it into investments, kept some liquid for donations and emergencies. And when I noticed my brother was drowning 3 years ago, when I saw him quietly embezzling from Dad's company to cover losses he was too proud to admit, I created Artemis Holdings. I've been propping up Chin Properties ever since. Victor sat down heavily, and for the first time all night he looked his full 75 years, the weight of his choices and mistakes written across every line of his face. Why? He asked, and the word came out broken. Because you're my father, Daniel said simply. Richard's my brother. And I kept hoping, every time I signed another loan document, every time I watched Richard forge my signature on fake borrowing records. Every time Miranda tore me down at family dinners, I kept hoping this family had something worth saving beyond the money. The words hung in the air, indictment and confession and heartbreak all at once. Around them, the remaining guests were recording everything, social credit scores fluctuating wildly on the wall displays as algorithms tried to recalculate who mattered and who didn't, as the entire power structure of the Chin family inverted in real time. In the chaos of Victor demanding proof and Miranda hyperventilating and business partners returning with renewed interest in the family that had somehow hidden a multimillionaire in plain sight, Sophie stood and walked around the table. She didn't return to her assigned seat at table 12. She pulled out the chair next to Daniel and sat close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that everyone watching understood exactly where her allegiance lay. You're kind of a genius, you know that? Sophie said quietly, for his ears only. I'm an idiot, Daniel replied, exhausted. I should have let it all collapse, but you didn't. Because underneath the hurt and the disappointment, you still love them. She took his hand under the table where only they could feel it, fingers threading through his in a gesture that felt both intimate and revolutionary. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's the strongest thing about you. Daniel looked at their joined hands, at Sophie's face so close to his, at the woman who'd defended him when he wouldn't defend himself, who'd seen his worth when everyone else saw only failure. Why are you here, Sophie? Really? This is insane, because 3 years ago, a shy art teacher covered in coffee stains asked if I wanted to grab dinner, Sophie said, voice dropping to something intimate despite the chaos around them. And I said no because I was scared of getting involved with a coworker, scared of risking what we had. She turned to face him fully, close enough that he could count her eyelashes. I've regretted that no for 1,095 days. I'm not saying no anymore. Sophie, Daniel breathed, and her name came out reverent. Plus, she added with a slight grin, I wanted to see if you'd actually let that walking Birkin bag kick you out of your own family fortune. I had faith you had a plan. I didn't have a plan. I was just tired of pretending. Then let's stop pretending about a lot of things. She leaned in, and for a moment Daniel thought she might kiss him right there at the table with 200 people watching and his family's world crumbling around them, but instead she whispered against his ear, breath warm on his skin. "After you finish dismantling your family's delusions, I'm taking you to a real restaurant. Not this catered nonsense. Somewhere we can actually talk." Daniel shivered at the proximity, at the promise implicit in her words, at 3 years of once suddenly becoming possible. "That sounds, how dare you!" Miranda's shriek cut through the moment like broken glass. She was standing now, mascara running, her perfect image destroyed for her million followers to witness and dissect. "You let me humiliate myself. You stood there and took it when you could have stopped me at any time." Daniel stood, still holding Sophie's hand, and faced his sister-in-law across the wreckage of the birthday party. "When I could have what, Miranda? Pulled out my bank statements? Proved my worth in dollars and cents? That's exactly what you all do to each other. Constantly. Measure. Compare. Judge. Rank by social credit scores and follower counts and property values." His voice was quiet but it carried, and everyone still in the room stopped to listen. "I'm so tired of it." Victor was staring at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time, calculations running behind his eyes, trying to reconcile the son he'd dismissed with the man who'd saved his company while living in deliberate simplicity. "Daniel, we need to discuss this. Privately. The company is $12 million in debt to me, according to the loan documents Richard signed," Daniel interrupted. "I'm within my rights to foreclose. To take everything." Richard had his head in his hands. Defeated, waiting for the final blow. The room held its collective breath. "But I won't," Daniel continued. "Under 2 conditions." Everyone leaned forward, desperate to know the terms, to understand what the family pariah would demand now that he held all the power. "First," Daniel said, looking directly at Miranda, "you will call your parents. Right now. The ones you've been hiding from this family because they're embarrassingly middle class. Your mother who worked as a seamstress, your father who drove a cab. You will invite them here, introduce them to everyone, and apologize for ever being ashamed of them." Miranda's face crumpled, tears streaming freely now, destroying the last remnants of her carefully curated image. "Daniel, please, they worked 2 jobs each to put you through college," Daniel continued, voice gentle but implacable. "Your mom made your wedding dress by hand because you couldn't afford a designer. It was beautiful. Then you told everyone it was Vera Wang and never spoke to them again. How do you know that?" Miranda whispered, "Your father drives a cab in my neighborhood," Daniel said simply. "We talk. He's proud of you, Miranda, despite everything. He carries your picture in his visor. You don't deserve him." Miranda collapsed into her chair, phone trembling in her hands as the weight of her choices crashed down on her. Several family members looked shocked, having believed her vague mentions of family in Europe. Having never questioned why no parents appeared at major events, Sophie leaned close and whispered, "Damn," with open admiration, and Daniel felt something warm expand in his chest. "Second condition," Daniel said, turning to Richard. "You will tell Dad the truth. All of it. Every bad decision, every covered-up failure, every time you prioritized looking successful over being honest. The West Side development you approved without due diligence because you wanted to impress the Wangs. The downtown properties you can't rent because you refused to update them, thinking the Chen name was enough. The construction project where you hired the cheapest contractor instead of the best and paid triple to fix the mistakes." Richard looked up, devastated. "Daniel, I'm not trying to destroy you," Daniel said, and his voice softened slightly. "I'm trying to save you. Dad needs to know the real numbers, the real problems. Because the company is salvageable, but not if we keep pretending everything's golden when it's rust underneath." Victor looked at Richard, voice heavy. "Is what he's saying true?" All of it, Richard nodded, unable to speak, and something fundamental shifted in the family dynamic as the golden child admitted his failures and the disappointment revealed his strength. And what about me? Victor asked Daniel, voice cracking for the first time all night. What's my punishment? I don't want to punish you, Dad, Daniel said quietly. I want you to finally see me. I see you, no. You see a disappointment. A son who didn't become CFO, who didn't wear the right suits, who didn't marry the right woman. You see what I'm not. Daniel's voice broke slightly. When did you last ask about my paintings? Or my students? Or what makes me happy? The question hung in the silence, unanswerable. Victor had no response because they both knew the answer was never. Not once in 35 years had Victor asked what mattered to Daniel instead of telling him what should matter. Mom saw me, Daniel said. She knew I was never going to be Richard, and she didn't want me to be. She left me her studio because she understood that art is what I am, not what I do for money. Victor stood slowly, and suddenly he looked every one of his 75 years, the weight of choices and missed opportunities written across his face. Your mother left you more than the studio, he said quietly, and left the dining room without explanation. The remaining guests murmured uncertainly. Miranda was on her phone, crying as she spoke to someone in rapid Spanish. Richard sat with his head in his hands, the picture of defeat. Cousin Amy was comforting Lucas, who looked shell-shocked by the revelations. Sophie leaned into Daniel, her presence steady and grounding. Are you okay? She asked softly. I don't know, Daniel admitted. I've played this confrontation in my head 1,000 times, but now that it's happened. He trailed off, searching for words that fit the complicated tangle of relief and grief and exhaustion in his chest. It doesn't feel as good as you thought. Sophie offered, it feels necessary. That's not the same thing, Lucas approached hesitantly, 15 years old and trying to process the revelation that his underestimated uncle was secretly wealthy and had been saving the family business while everyone mocked him. Uncle Daniel? Are you really rich? Daniel smiled sadly. Yeah, buddy. Apparently, but you still drive the Honda? I like the Honda. It runs fine, Lucas considered this, and something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing a possibility he hadn't known existed. That's cool. He paused, gathering courage. My dad says I need to give up music. That I should focus on business school. But I don't want to, then don't, Daniel said simply. Will you teach me? To be brave like you. Before Daniel could answer, Victor returned carrying an old wooden box, setting it on the table with a thud that made crystal glasses ring. The box was cedar, worn smooth with age, inscribed with characters Daniel recognized as his mother's handwriting. Your mother made me promise to give this to you when you turned 30. Victor said heavily. I didn't. Daniel stared at the box, at his father's hands resting on the lid. Dad, what? I was angry, Victor said, the confession coming out rough and unsteady. At her, for dying. At you, for being like her. At myself for loving the idea of a legacy more than the people creating it. He opened the box. Inside were documents, photographs, letters in sealed envelopes, and what appeared to be sketches or small paintings wrapped in acid-free paper. The smell of cedar and old paper filled the air, carrying with it the ghost of Daniel's mother, her presence suddenly vivid in the room. Your mother didn't just leave you her studio, Victor said. She left you 12 paintings. From her personal collection. Works she'd bought from artists before they became famous. She had an eye for talent that I never understood, never appreciated. Daniel's hands were shaking as he reached for the documents. What artists? Victor read from an inventory list, his voice gaining strength. 2 early Basquiats. A Yayoi Kusama from the 1960s. A Carrie James Marshall. 3 paintings by someone named Kehind Wiley. He looked up. Do these names mean something? Sophie gasped audibly. Daniel felt the room tilt slightly, had to grip the edge of the table for balance. Dad, those are worth more than Chin properties, Sophie finished, voice stunned. Combined. Daniel, if those are authenticated and in good condition, you're looking at $60 to $70 million. Possibly more. Even Victor looked shocked, having had no idea what his late wife had quietly accumulated, what legacy she'd built while he was focused on real estate and social credit scores, and the kind of success that could be quantified in quarterly earnings. You've had these for 5 years? Daniel asked, voice barely steady. Just sitting in storage, I told myself I was protecting them. Waiting for the right time. Victor's face twisted with shame. The truth is, I was punishing you. For not being what I wanted. For choosing art over business, passion over profit. Your mother loved you unconditionally, and I didn't know how. His voice broke on the last word, and suddenly he was just an old man confronting his failures as a father. Richard stood abruptly, decision crystallizing on his face. Dad, sit down. Please. I owe you the full truth. What followed was 20 minutes of brutal honesty, Richard walking Victor through every financial mistake, every ego-driven decision, every moment he'd prioritized appearance over substance. He explained how Miranda's pressure to keep up with the Wongs had driven him to take riskier bets, how he'd approved the West Side development without proper research because he wanted to prove he was as visionary as his father. How he'd cut corners on the construction project and paid triple to fix it. He admitted to forging the loan documents that night, to creating fake evidence of Daniel's irresponsibility, to planning his brother's humiliation as a desperate attempt to make someone else the scapegoat for his own failures. The business partners had left, but family remained, watching Richard dismantle his carefully constructed image piece by piece, watching the golden child admit he'd been gold paint over rust. I've been jealous of you for 10 years, Richard said to Daniel, tears streaming freely now. Since Mom died and you just let go of everything I thought mattered. You stopped caring what people thought. You stopped measuring yourself against Dad's expectations. And you seemed happy. Really happy. I hated you for that, Richard, Daniel started. Let me finish, Richard interrupted. I took your money for 3 years and told myself I was protecting the family business. But really, I was protecting my ego. The idea that I was the successful son, the golden child. I needed you to stay small so I could feel big. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. For tonight, for the lies, for every time I stood by while Miranda tore you down. I'm so fucking sorry. The brothers stood on opposite ends of the table, the space between them charged with years of rivalry and resentment and the complicated love of family. Then Richard moved first, crossing to Daniel with unsteady steps, and they embraced, messy and emotional, years of damage beginning to mend. Miranda was still on her phone, voice shaking. My parents are coming. They'll be here in 40 minutes. I called them and I told them I've been ashamed of them. And that I'm ashamed of myself for it. She looked at Daniel, mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks, her curated image completely destroyed. I don't expect forgiveness. But you were right. They're good people. Better than me. They asked how you were doing. They remember you visiting my dad at the cab stand, Sophie whispered against Daniel's ear. You visited her dad? Daniel shrugged. Embarrassed. He gives good advice. And he knows all the best cheap restaurants in the city. Sophie looked at him with such open affection that Daniel felt his chest constrict. You're unreal. The family began to disperse, people needing space to process, to prepare for Miranda's parents' arrival, to digest revelations that had upended everything they thought they knew. Sophie took Daniel's hand and led him outside to the garden, to the manicured space where holographic lights floated between real flowers, where a fountain recycled water with perfect efficiency, where wealth had tried to improve on nature and mostly just made it sterile. So, Sophie said, turning to face him. Multimillionaire artist. Secret philanthropist. Family savior. Did I miss anything? Coward who almost let his abusive sister-in-law kick him out of his family? Daniel offered, strategic genius who orchestrated the most satisfying takedown I've ever witnessed. Sophie stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell her perfume, could see the gold flecks in her eyes. Daniel, you could have destroyed them. You had all the power, all the proof, all the moral high ground. And you used it to heal them. I don't feel like a genius. I feel exhausted. That's because you actually care. Revenge would have been easier. She reached up, touching his face with fingers that trembled slightly. But you're not easy, are you? You're complicated and deep, and you feel everything so intensely that you hide it behind thrift store cardigans and bad coffee. The coffee's not bad, Daniel protested weakly. It's terrible. You have no taste buds. She was smiling now, inches from him, her breath warm on his face. But you have something better. You have a soul that's still soft despite everything they'd put you through. Do you know how rare that is, Sophie? I need to tell you something, that you've been in love with me since the coffee incident 3 years ago? I know, Daniel stared at her, stunned. How? Daniel, you bring me coffee every morning. The exact way I like it, which you memorized from one offhand comment 2 years ago. You accidentally volunteer for every science department event I'm at. You leave books on my desk that you think I'll like, and I always do. Tears gathered in her eyes. And when I mentioned my grandmother was sick, a home health aide mysteriously showed up the next week, fully funded for 6 months. You love people quietly. It's your superpower. And I've been falling for you in slow motion for 3 years, too scared to risk our friendship, and now? Daniel asked, barely breathing, now I've watched you face down your entire family with nothing but truth and boundaries. I've seen you turn your brother's betrayal into an opportunity for growth. I've watched you protect your nephew, honor your mother, and give your father a chance at redemption. She pulled him down to her, eliminating the last inches between them. Now I'm done being scared, she kissed him, soft at first, tentative, a question. Then Daniel's hands found her waist and he pulled her closer, kissing her back with 3 years of want and restraint finally breaking free. Sophie made a small sound against his mouth and threaded her fingers through his hair, and the kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate and inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Foreheads pressed together, the garden lights casting them in soft colors. I don't want to mess this up, Daniel said. Then don't. Be honest with me. Be yourself. That's all I want, I can do that. He paused. I'm terrified, good. Me too. Sophie grinned, pulled him back down. Now kiss me again before someone comes looking for us. He did, and this time it was slower, deeper, the kiss of 2 people who knew they had time, who understood that this was a beginning rather than a culmination. His hands were in her hair, her body pressed against his, 3 years of restraint shattering like glass. They only broke apart when voices drifted from the house, reality intruding on their private moment. To be continued, Sophie said, breathless and smiling. Definitely to be continued, Daniel agreed. Back inside, Miranda's parents had arrived. Elena was a small woman in a simple floral dress, carrying a casserole dish because of course she bring food to celebrations. Carlos still smelled faintly of car air freshener, nervous in his clean button-down, looking around the mansion like he'd stepped into a different world. Miranda introduced them to the family through tears, the reconciliation messy and emotional and real. Elena hugged her daughter, whispering forgiveness in Spanish. Carlos shook Victor's hand firmly, 2 self-made men recognizing something in each other despite their vastly different definitions of success. Your son Daniel, he's good people, Carlos said to Victor. He listens when an old man talks. Not many young people do that anymore. Victor looked at Daniel with new eyes, seeing him clearly maybe for the first time. I'm learning that I should have listened more too. Then Victor did something no one had seen in years. He took off his suit jacket, loosened his tie, unbuttoned his collar, and sat down at the table, not at the head but in the middle, like a regular person instead of a patriarch. The gesture was small but seismic. Daniel, the paintings. Your mother's collection. What are they worth? Victor asked. Conservatively, 60 to 70 million, Daniel said. If sold as a complete collection to the right buyer. Possibly more. Even Sophie looked stunned by the number. Around the table, the remaining family members absorbed the revelation that Daniel wasn't just wealthy, he was generationally wealthy, that he could buy and sell them all and had chosen instead to live modestly and teach art to teenagers. They're yours, Victor said quietly. They always were. I had no right to keep them from you. What will you do? Daniel asked. About the company? Richard leaned forward. I can fix it. If you'll let me try. With real oversight this time. Real accountability. Maybe a co-CFO situation? Someone to keep me honest? Miranda spoke up quickly, desperate to contribute. I could help. I have a business degree I've never used. I've been so busy trying to look successful, I never tried to actually be useful. Victor surprised everyone. Or we could sell. Let it go. Start something new, smaller. Something that doesn't require us to sacrifice our family for appearances, the patriarch suggesting they release the empire. Growth, real and unexpected. I have a different idea, Daniel said, looking at Lucas. What if we pivoted? Turned some of those empty downtown properties into affordable artist studios and galleries? Created scholarships for art students? Made the Chen name mean something besides money? Lucas lit up like someone had switched on a light inside him. Really, really? But only if you help design it. You and your music friends. Make it something that actually serves the community. Victor smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time all night. Your mother would have loved that. That's the idea, Daniel said softly. The party transformed as midnight passed. Someone found a Bluetooth speaker and Lucas was playing jazz, his saxophone skills making the mansion finally feel alive. Elena's casserole was devoured, people loosening ties and kicking off heels, having real conversations instead of performing for neural feeds. They shared stories about Margaret Chen, about the woman who'd known that art was how people told the truth, whose presence had been felt throughout the entire evening like a gentle ghost guiding them toward something better. Sophie and Daniel found a love seat in the corner, his arm around her shoulders, her shoes off and feet tucked under her. They watched the family with matching expressions of cautious optimism. Think they'll actually change? Sophie asked. Some will. Some won't. Richard wants to, I can see it. Miranda's going to struggle. Dad might be too old to fully transform. But the effort matters, and you? What do you want from all this? Daniel considered the question carefully. I want to keep teaching. I want to sell Mom's paintings and do something meaningful with the money. I want to be in Lucas's life as the uncle who shows him there are different ways to be successful. He looked at her. And I want to see where this goes. I want that too. Fair warning though, I'm intense. I don't do casual. I'm all in or I'm out. Good. Because I've been all in for 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed him again, softer this time, comfortable, the kiss of two people who knew they had time to figure things out. Around them, the family continued their tentative healing, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, the Chen name could mean something worth keeping.